In 2018, Los Angeles radiated the same mixture of glamour and decay it always had, a city where red carpets and broken sidewalks existed within a single glance. Amanda Reeves knew both sides well. As the daughter of a film industry magnate and heir to a media empire, she had grown up under the glow of studio lights, her life documented in society pages and whispered about at industry events. Yet despite the privileges that surrounded her, Amanda felt suffocated. Every smile she received was weighted with expectation, every invitation calculated, and every relationship poisoned by the suspicion that affection was merely a transaction. She longed to see how people behaved when money was no longer the defining factor, when her name ceased to act as both a crown and a cage. To test this, she constructed a new life. She left behind the mansion in Beverly Hills, with its staff of housekeepers and chefs, closed the heavy oak doors of her family's legacy, and quietly disappeared into the anonymity of the San Fernando Valley. She rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in Van Nuys, a space with peeling paint along the baseboards and a view of a tired strip mall across the street. The kitchen held mismatched dishes bought at thrift shops, and the furniture was sparse, selected more for necessity than charm. Amanda relished the plainness. Each chipped cup, each uneven shelf reminded her she was free of the scrutiny that came with her true identity. To complete the illusion, she sought work that would erase any trace of her background. Through a local staffing agency, she accepted a position as a production assistant on the set of a low-budget television series that filmed in a converted warehouse. The tasks were monotonous and grueling, carrying cables across sticky concrete floors, refilling coffee for exhausted crew members, and organizing chaotic paperwork. Yet to Amanda, this new role was liberating. No one asked her about box office returns or distribution rights. No one cared who her father was. She was just another assistant, invisible in a sea of hurried faces. It was in this environment that she first encountered Ryan. He was a fledgling actor in his late 20s, clinging to auditions and walk-on roles with the same desperation shared by thousands in Los Angeles. His charm was obvious, his energy magnetic, and his stories about the industry were filled with both bravado and insecurity. To him, Amanda appeared refreshingly different from the women he usually met at industry mixers. She carried herself without pretense, dressed in plain jeans and faded shirts, and never spoke about connections or opportunities. Her laughter, light and genuine, seemed untouched by the sharp edges of ambition. In the early weeks, their connection blossomed in small, ordinary ways. They shared sandwiches in the break room, leaning against folding chairs while overhead lights hummed. After long days on set, they walked through quiet streets to a corner cafe that served cheap coffee in paper cups. Amanda would smile at the simplicity, savoring moments when conversation turned toward books, films, or dreams, rather than the politics of fame. She felt for the first time in years that someone might like her for who she was, rather than what she represented. But beneath the surface, the tension of her double life tugged constantly. At night, when she returned to her apartment, she scrolled through emails from her financial advisors, legal teams, and corporate managers. They awaited her approval on investment strategies, charity projects, and contracts worth millions. She answered in careful bursts, ensuring her hidden world did not collapse. Then she would set the phone aside, return to her thrift store couch, and remind herself of the role she had chosen to play. The anonymity came with a price, but she was determined to pay it. Ryan, at first, found charm in her modest life. He laughed when she suggested taco trucks over trendy restaurants. He admired her ability to find joy in wandering through second-hand bookstores rather than chasing glamorous parties. Yet his ambitions were insatiable, and the reality of her supposed modest means slowly clashed with his vision of success. When his friends bragged about luxury apartments or expensive nights out, Amanda's presence did not elevate him in the same way. She noticed the subtle shift in his tone, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the hesitation before introducing her to others. Still, in those early days, Amanda kept faith in her experiment. She believed in the possibility of discovering truth beneath layers of ambition and performance. Her heart ached with the hope that perhaps Ryan would prove different, that perhaps love untainted by wealth could exist even in a city built on illusion. Each morning, as she packed her worn messenger bag with notebooks and granola bars, she rehearsed her modest role, perfecting the act of an ordinary woman struggling to make ends meet. And every evening, as the sun sank behind the Hollywood hills, she wondered how long she could continue the charade before her secret world inevitably collided with the fragile illusion she had built. Ryan's ambition became more visible with each passing week. He lived in a city that thrived on surfaces, and he wanted desperately to belong to the circles that sparkled under the lights of Sunset Boulevard. His conversations revolved around auditions that might lead to breakthroughs, industry parties where one handshake could change the trajectory of a career, and the shimmering idea of a lifestyle that came with recognition. Amanda listened quietly, maintaining the mask she had so carefully built, while he outlined the kind of future he imagined. In that future, appearances mattered as much as talent, and the woman at his side was expected to embody success as much as he did. Amanda had committed fully to her disguise. She dressed in thrift store finds and deliberately left her hair undone, presenting herself as someone who made choices out of necessity rather than preference. She took buses across the sprawling city, waiting at crowded stops under glaring sun, her headphones tangled in her bag, and her shoes worn from constant use. At work, she ate sandwiches she had packed at home, or inexpensive salads from a corner market. She embraced the routine as part of her experiment, yet she noticed the way Ryan's eyes flickered with discomfort when she arrived at gatherings in her simple clothes. When Ryan introduced her to his friends, the atmosphere changed. They smiled politely, but quickly turned their attention elsewhere, their laughter tinged with something sharp whenever she left the table. A few whispered remarks floated back to her, comments about her shoes or her lack of designer labels. Ryan's laughter would join theirs, light at first, then edged with unease when he realized she had overheard. He rarely defended her. Instead, he brushed past the moments, offering her quick glances that carried both apology and irritation. In the dim glow of nightclubs and rooftop lounges, Amanda observed him closely. He thrived under the attention of others, telling stories about auditions that nearly succeeded, embellishing the truth to appear more accomplished. With her by his side, however, he seemed restless. She represented simplicity in a place obsessed with grandeur, and the contrast made him uneasy. She watched him pour energy into conversations with agents and aspiring stars, his smile broad and calculated. When his gaze returned to her, it carried a shadow of dissatisfaction, as though she did not fit the picture he wanted the world to see. Amanda remained calm, even as the signs accumulated. She reminded herself that this was the essence of her test, to see if he could value her when there was no promise of wealth or recognition attached. She let him speak about expensive cars he hoped to own, about houses in the hills he dreamed of buying, about vacations on exotic islands. Each vision he described carried an unspoken requirement that the person beside him had to match the image. Amanda, in her faded t-shirts and secondhand sneakers, was a jarring contrast. At small gatherings, she noticed the subtle ways he distanced himself. When conversations turned to careers, he exaggerated her position, referring to her as if she were simply between opportunities, softening the reality of her modest job. When friends pressed for details, he redirected, steering focus back to himself. Amanda absorbed these gestures with quiet endurance, noting each attempt to disguise her simplicity. The exhaustion in his voice became more frequent. He spoke of the sacrifices he was making, the relentless grind of auditions, the endless chase for recognition. His frustrations spilled into their conversations, and she sensed how easily he placed part of the blame on her unpolished presence. To him, she became a reflection of the struggle he wanted to escape. Her modest image clashed with the future he pictured, and that dissonance unsettled him. Amanda felt the weight of every look he cast her way, each one sharper than the last. She felt the silence stretch between them in moments that once held laughter. The mask she wore revealed truths about him faster than she had anticipated. He was showing her, through impatience and subtle disdain, that affection tied to status would not survive the absence of it. As she returned home to her small apartment at night, Amanda reflected on the distance growing between them. She saw how his hunger for recognition left little room for authenticity, how his desire to be seen with someone who fit Hollywood's expectations overshadowed the kindness he had once shown her. The signs were everywhere now, in his words, in his tone, in the way his friends looked at her. She understood that the test was nearing its conclusion. The illusion of modesty had done its work, and soon, the truth about Ryan's heart would stand fully revealed. The evening had settled over Sunset Boulevard, with its usual blend of neon lights, the distant hum of traffic, and the promise of indulgence that Los Angeles wore like perfume. Amanda arrived at the bar a few minutes after Ryan, slipping into the low-lit room where music pulsed from hidden speakers and the scent of cocktails and fried food drifted through the air. She had chosen her clothes with deliberate simplicity, a plain shirt and jeans that carried no trace of the wealth she secretly held. Ryan was already at the bar, leaning against the counter with a drink in hand, his posture restless, his eyes darting toward the door as though scanning for someone more important. He motioned her over with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The moment she sat down, she sensed the weight of his impatience. His shoulders were stiff, his foot tapped against the floor, and the casual charm he once carried seemed replaced by a sharpened edge. Conversation began in halting tones. Small talk about the day, about the chaos of the set, about the relentless grind of auditions. But beneath the surface, Amanda felt the tension building, pressing against the silence between words. It did not take long for Ryan to steer the moment toward what was truly on his mind. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed, as he laid out his judgment. He spoke of their relationship as if it were a failed project, something that could no longer serve its purpose. He told her plainly that it was meaningless to continue, that his vision of life required a partner who could step onto red carpets with confidence and grace, someone who looked like part of the world he desperately wanted to claim. He compared that vision to her, painting her simplicity as a burden he could no longer carry. Amanda sat still as his words struck her one by one. They were not shouted, nor spoken with cruelty, but their precision made them sting all the more. He described the exhaustion he felt when bringing her to gatherings, the discomfort of watching friends whisper behind her back, the frustration of imagining a future where her modest image dragged against his ambitions. He wanted a woman who was a symbol, someone polished, adorned, and admired. The picture he painted excluded her entirely. Her heart tightened as she listened, yet her face remained calm. She kept her eyes on him, unflinching, letting the reality sink in without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She understood that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the inevitable breaking point her disguise had been designed to create. Still, the ache inside her chest was real, a deep wound carved by the knowledge that his affection had never been for her spirit, but for what he thought she might eventually represent. The bar around them carried on in careless rhythm. Laughter rose from a group in the corner, glasses clinked as bartenders poured more drinks, and the city outside pulsed with energy. In stark contrast, their table felt like an island of silence after his words had been spoken. Ryan leaned back, his drink untouched, as if relieved to finally unburden himself. Amanda drew a slow breath, nodded slightly, and allowed the truth to settle between them like a heavy stone. She did not argue. She did not beg him to reconsider or ask for explanations. Her silence was her final answer, stronger than any defense she could have given. In that silence she released him, and at the same time released herself from the illusion that he might prove different. The mask she had worn had done its job, peeling away the surface and revealing the emptiness beneath his charm. He was a man who saw only symbols of success, never the essence of the soul beside him. When he finally stood to leave, he placed a few bills on the table, muttered something polite and unnecessary, and walked out into the glow of Sunset Boulevard. Amanda remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, her expression composed. The ache in her chest pulsed, but so did a strange sense of clarity. She had given him every chance to show his heart, and he had chosen to reveal its emptiness instead. Amanda finished her glass of water, gathered her bag, and stepped out into the night. The city lights reflected on the pavement, distorted by the faint traces of rain from earlier in the day. She walked slowly, each step steady, the noise of traffic and laughter blending into the background. Inside, she carried the weight of disappointment, but also the strength of knowing she had not lost anything real. She had only unmasked a truth that had always been waiting to surface. The break had come, sharp and final, but with it came the end of doubt. Amanda knew the experiment had worked. The man she had tested had shown his true self, and though the revelation hurt, it also freed her. She walked into the night not as someone abandoned, but as someone who had seen the clarity behind the facade. In the days that followed, Amanda returned to the life she had muted. The iron gates of the Beverly Hills estate swung open to a world arranged with meticulous precision, a world that recognized her without question. The driveway curved through terraces of clipped citrus and lavender to a glass and stone mansion set above the city. Inside, floors of pale oak and polished limestone carried light from wide, uninterrupted windows. The horizon unspooled in a quiet blue band beyond the infinity pool, and the hills rolled like folded silk beneath a high, unbothered sky. The house resumed its quiet rhythm around her, as if a symphony had picked up at the bar where it had paused. The staff adjusted seamlessly to her presence. The driver idled at the porte-cochere with the ease of long habit. The house manager reviewed a schedule that ran by the quarter hour. The chef's kitchen exhaled the soft, clean scent of citrus oil and steel, and on a marble island sat a tray of neatly arranged folders delivered from the corporate office. In the room that served as her study, a long table held proofs for branding, timelines, and sponsorship decks for the new film award she had conceived months earlier. The award had been designed as a bridge between risk and recognition, a prize that would fund stories overlooked by the marketplace, with a slate that favored first-time directors and inclusive crews. It had started as a margin note in one of her late-night planning documents. It had become a line item, then a board vote, and finally an anchor event capable of real gravity. She moved through the tasks with the quiet resolve of someone who had returned to a native language. Her communications team prepared a narrative that would introduce the award to the industry with clarity and purpose. The press plan ran in concentric rings. First an announcement to trades, then a feature with in-depth photography, then a controlled cascade across social channels. Creative direction focused on restraint rather than spectacle. The logo had been built from geometric strokes that suggested a frame without enclosing it. The palette held to deep charcoal, bone, and a single accent of gold used sparingly. The stage design followed the same principles. Renderings showed a proscenium of matte black planes pierced by a luminous aperture of light, flanked by a modular orchestra platform and a runway that allowed honorees to be seen without being swallowed by scale. Committees met in timed segments. The selection panel combined veteran editors, cinematographers with documentary roots, and playwrights who understood economy. Each had signed conflict disclosures and confidentiality agreements that left no room for quiet favors. The philanthropic arm coordinated a grant structure tied to measurable deliverables, a production stipend released in tranches aligned to milestones, mentorship hours tracked and audited, and an archival requirement that guaranteed preservation of the finished work in a public access repository. A set of travel bursaries would bring regional finalists to Los Angeles for workshops on contract literacy, set safety, and post-production workflows. Nothing existed as a gesture alone. Every line connected to consequence. The logistics draft grew into a living atlas. She reviewed venue load-in schedules that mapped dock access, rigging points, and cable runs. She checked security matrices that layered credential zones, sweep times, and contingency routes in case of protest or power failure. She scanned hospitality grids listing allergies, prayer breaks, mobility accommodations, and green room turnover. The rehearsal calendar slotted presenters with blocking notes that reduced improvisation without crushing spontaneity. A separate document tracked gowns and tailoring for honorees who needed styling support but had no means to pay for it, with designers briefed to prioritize dignity and ease over spectacle. Her personal preparation moved in parallel. The wardrobe team proposed silhouettes that would photograph cleanly under hard light without sparkle or distraction, with seam allowances placed for micro-adjustments on the day of show. The hairstylist requested humidity data from the venue to calibrate hold. The speechwriter delivered drafts that she redlined with heavy pencil, removing any line that sounded like triumph, replacing it with language of stewardship and invitation. She refused the temptation to center herself in the origin story of the award. The text instead traced lineage through crews who had built meaning with insufficient resources, and it articulated a future measured by access rather than applause. In the evenings, she reviewed the reveal plan. The decision had arrived in her mind, with the calm inevitability of a tide change. The award would also be the moment she ended her experiment. She would stand within the frame she had built and allow the industry to see the version of herself that had been hidden behind thrift store cotton and bus transfers. The plan did not rely on shock. It relied on context. The press kit contained biographical notes that named her role in the family company and delineated the structure of her authority. The messaging avoided apology and avoided boasting. It claimed the obvious, that she possessed means, that she had used those means to build a mechanism meant to outlast her, and that she would be accountable for its impact. She rehearsed the cadence of her steps from wing to podium, the measured pause before the first sentence, the breath placed before the words that would anchor the mission. She practiced stillness rather than flourish. She imagined the moment the house lights rose to a sensible level, faces visible as distinct human beings rather than a glare of lenses. She imagined the internal sensation of release, the weight of secrecy sliding from the ribs like a garment shrugged from the shoulders. Her mind cataloged the likely responses: curiosity, recalibration, the faint edge of cynicism that reliably attended any announcement connected to wealth. She designed a response to each: transparency, measurable outcomes, long memory. The days shortened as the date approached. Trucks arrived at the venue with truss and deck, crates labeled with foam silhouettes that cradled microphones like instruments in a case. The crew chalked marks and unrolled cable mats, built platforms, hung line arrays, and tested redundancy. The stage manager called standbys over headset and logged each cue in a binder that would travel with the show like a ship's chart. On site, her team assembled the donor lounge with museum-grade vitrines displaying costume sketches and annotated shot lists from the inaugural slate, evidence that the prize existed not only as promise, but as work already in motion. On the last night before load-in completed, she stood alone at the back of the dark auditorium while technicians adjusted the main wash. A pale column of light pushed into the dust above the stage, revealing a thin universe of suspended particles turning slowly in a current no one could see. She felt the thin seam between the two lives she had been living, felt it close with a soft, decisive click. The house she had returned to, the network of obligations and capacities that defined her, and the mechanism she had built for others now aligned like teeth in a well-made gear. The revelation ahead no longer felt like exposure. It felt like alignment. When the final schedule hit her phone just after midnight, each cell carried the texture of inevitability. The program would begin with a concise montage, not of faces on carpets, but of hands building sets, eyes behind viewfinders, and notes scrawled on script pages. The first honoree would accept a grant shaped to remove immediate obstacles. The final segment would fix the mission in the mind with a closing image and a simple, durable sentence. At the center of that flow stood her quiet decision, placed not as a finale, but as a hint. She understood that the unveiling would change how others regarded her. She accepted that shift without fear. The life she had hidden was not a costume to put on. It was a fluency to speak in full voice. Ryan's unraveling did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It advanced in increments, the way a shirt frays at the cuff before anyone notices. The first sign arrived quietly when his manager stopped returning emails with the old urgency, answering instead with delayed, cautious messages that suggested a growing distance. Auditions that once came in clusters began to thin. The self-tape requests shifted from promising guest roles to non-union opportunities with no credits that mattered. He told himself it was a seasonal dip. He told himself the next quarter would rebound. The city around him continued its relentless performance. Billboards swapped faces, premieres sprayed light across the boulevards, and new hopefuls arrived daily with crisp headshots and fresh confidence. Ryan studied them from the periphery and tried to project the momentum he no longer felt. He redoubled his gym routines, booked headshots he could not afford, and posted relentlessly on social media to maintain a fiction of ascendancy. Algorithms rewarded him with brief spikes of attention, but calls did not follow. His rent grace period shortened to a stern notice. The lease cosigner he had relied on 2 years earlier had moved to another coast and did not answer. The car went next. A missed payment could be disguised as an oversight. Two formed a pattern. He watched from a second-story window as a tow truck reversed into the lot and lifted his aging coupe by its front wheels. He told himself it was temporary, a setback waiting for reversal, but the quiet afterward had weight. Rideshares replaced his car, then buses replaced the rideshares. He became expert at deciphering transit schedules that kept him just punctual enough to maintain the illusion of control. He sought leverage. He tried to attach himself to rising circles, spent money at bars where agents gathered, and volunteered for unpaid table reads that kept him visible without keeping him solvent. The velvet rope outside certain rooftop events tightened as if it had sensed his weakened posture. The bouncers who once nodded out of recognition now inspected guest lists with exacting thoroughness, and the publicists no longer waved him through. He learned the specific humiliation of being asked to step aside while someone more relevant arrived. Debt spread like spilled ink. Interest compounded. His credit card balances crossed thresholds that triggered terse emails from banks. He signed on for commercial workshops, taught by casting assistants who promised insight for a fee. He booked one day on a non-broadcast industrial that paid less than his rent. He told himself the material did not reflect his talent, that better work waited beyond the next email. His agent, pragmatic and professional, finally phased him to a junior colleague whose roster was already crowded. Opportunities rarely emerge from crowded rosters. The friendships he had curated proved to be arrangements more than bonds. Invitations thinned in tandem with his prospects. He noticed how quickly a group chat scrolls past the name of someone who cannot open doors. The friends who remained were kind in private, apologetic in public, careful not to jeopardize their own footholds. They said little. Their silence made space for the narrative that forms around anyone slipping in a town that requires constant ascent. Health insurance lapsed. A routine dental cleaning became a luxury item. Meals became exercises in precision. Rice, eggs, canned tuna, measured as if each gram could influence fortune. He completed background work under a sun that bleached patience from skin, and stood in wardrobe lines long enough to count the seams in the floor. He told himself every great actor had done the same. He posted a cropped still from a day player role that never aired and reworded the caption 4 times to suggest significance. Gossip drifted toward him along predictable channels. Someone mentioned a role he had nearly secured going to an actor he had once dismissed as average. Someone else repeated that a certain director considered him undisciplined. He recognized the trait of Los Angeles to rename absence as laziness and misfortune as lack of merit. He adapted his posture accordingly, shoulders squared, voice steady, eyes clear in rooms that had already decided. It was during one of those thin weeks that he heard about the new awards initiative. Press releases populated trade newsletters, industry text threads recirculated the announcement with admiration, and the studio attached to the prize carried reputation enough to cut through cynicism. The structure of the award looked serious. Production grants, mentorship, archival commitments, a ceremony at a venue large enough to matter. The name Reeves arrived with the imprint of legacy. The plan was immediately credible. He understood instinctively that the event would assemble patrons, executives, and curators of opportunity, the kind of room where trajectories could still be adjusted by a handshake and a coherent sentence. He needed to be seen there. He needed to rebuild proximity to heat. He assembled a strategy from the fragments of his remaining resources. He borrowed a suit from a friend with similar measurements, pressing it in a bathroom with steam rising from a shower because he could not afford a tailor. He polished shoes that had walked too many sidewalks and covered their scuffs with a marker. He rehearsed an introduction that contained neither apology nor desperation. He studied the guest list as it leaked through public posts and learned names of assistants, not just executives, because assistants often stand at the gate to decision-makers. He memorized the award's mission language so he could mirror it back in conversation without sounding rehearsed. He planned a route through the venue's lobby that would bring him by the donor lounge without appearing to linger. Getting in required finesse. The public ticket tier had sold out, the inner circles were credentialed, and RSVP confirmations lived behind email addresses he had not been granted. He reached out to a director he had once helped with a self-tape, offered to carry equipment, to usher, to volunteer. There was no room, he was told, in a delay that arrived as an absence, not a message. He pivoted to a cinematographer he had met at a festival. A +1 slot materialized at the edge of the event. Not the inner ring, but close enough to see the ring's light. It came with the unspoken requirement that he behave as if he belonged, and the explicit condition that he would not request introductions he had not earned. He prepared anyway. He printed business cards that felt heavier than their cheap stock warranted, and slid them into a pocket he could reach without fumbling. He refreshed his online portfolio with neutral branding and removed older clips that hinted too clearly at struggle. He practiced a listening face, the one that makes other people feel intelligent. He told himself that hunger could be mistaken for drive if carried correctly. On the evening of the ceremony, he stood before a mirror in the borrowed suit and examined the man who looked back. The tie knot sat a fraction off center. The collar points bent slightly where starch should have pressed them flat. The eyes were older than the last time he had studied them closely. Yet beneath the fatigue, a current of will still moved. He catalogued the small repairs he had made to present a version of himself the room might accept. He affixed a borrowed confidence with the same careful hands he used to pin a pocket square. He left his apartment and descended onto a street that smelled of jasmine and warm asphalt. The ride across town felt like a ferry crossing, one shore falling away while the other remained a line in the dark. The venue's facade rose ahead with measured grandeur, its entrance managed by staff who moved with rehearsed calm. He blended into the arriving stream, found his contact, received a wristband of the correct color, and stepped into the cool air of the lobby where light fell in architected planes. Conversations overlapped like orchestrated lines. Laughter carried the timbre of people who believed themselves already redeemed by proximity. He paused at the threshold and took inventory of possibility. Somewhere inside the networked crowd, money and influence crossed in quiet negotiations. Somewhere inside, the studio's leadership would be deciding whom to remember tomorrow morning. And somewhere inside, he knew, the woman he had once dismissed as ordinary would stand in a place he had not imagined for her. He did not let that thought settle. He focused instead on the immediate task: to move, to be seen, to transform need into opportunity, before the night hardened into memory. The auditorium shimmered beneath the blaze of stage lights, its vaulted ceiling alive with golden reflections from crystal chandeliers. Rows of velvet seats were packed with executives, journalists, actors, and hopeful newcomers, all waiting for the announcement of a prize that promised to reshape careers. Cameras hovered like restless birds, tracking every movement, broadcasting the spectacle across networks and industry blogs in real time. The atmosphere buzzed with expectation, a mixture of anticipation and ambition. When Amanda stepped onto the stage, the energy shifted instantly. Draped in a gown that seemed to catch every fragment of light, she moved with poise that silenced the murmurs. For many in the audience, she had been a vague figure, an industry name associated with legacy, but not a face in the public arena. Tonight she became undeniable. The applause erupted not only for her lineage, but for her own presence, a force that seemed to demand recognition. She began her speech calmly, her voice resonant, measured, carrying a confidence honed in boardrooms and private negotiations, but never before displayed on such a stage. She unveiled the Foundation's mission: millions allocated to cultivate new voices, to provide mentorship, to dismantle the barriers that had long excluded talent without money or connections. Each word was precise, a brick in a structure she was building before the audience's eyes, not of wealth, but of vision. Among the guests, Ryan froze. He had been mingling at the fringes of the crowd, rehearsing lines of self-promotion, preparing to insert himself into conversations that might secure him a lifeline. The sight of Amanda in command of the stage shattered the script he had written for himself. His mouth went dry, his carefully borrowed confidence dissolving into disbelief. He recognized the cadence of her voice, the tilt of her head, the elegance of her gestures. The woman he had dismissed as unworthy of red carpets now stood at the center of one, commanding the attention of Hollywood's elite. The cameras, ever hungry for contrast and drama, found him. His expression betrayed the collapse of his composure. Lenses captured every flicker of recognition, every muscle tightening in his jaw, every drop of color draining from his face. Journalists, sensing the symmetry of downfall and triumph, aimed their devices toward him with a collective instinct for spectacle. Within hours, his reaction would circulate online, paired with headlines that required no embellishment. Amanda continued, untouched by the storm gathering in the shadows. She spoke not of herself, but of the principles she had tested in silence. True character, she explained, reveals itself not in the glow of premieres, but in the dim corners of life when there is nothing to offer but sincerity. She described resilience as the currency that matters, generosity as the investment that endures, integrity as the role every actor must play off stage. Each phrase fell like a quiet verdict, not shouted, not directed at any single individual, yet impossible for Ryan to ignore. The audience responded with waves of applause, their faces lit by admiration, their bodies leaning forward as if pulled toward her gravity. The applause was not mere courtesy. It was recognition of authenticity, the rare commodity in an industry drenched in pretense. The ovation extended, echoing against the walls of the hall, rising with each sentence that confirmed her as both benefactor and authority. Ryan stood rooted near a column, half hidden yet completely exposed. He tried to shrink, to avoid the eyes turning toward him, but the cameras betrayed him. Each image, each clip, immortalized the contrast, her radiance and his ruin. Shame mingled with desperation as he realized the futility of every excuse he might craft. He had measured worth by appearances and found himself bankrupt before a woman who had mastered concealment only to reveal truth at her chosen moment. Amanda closed her remarks by thanking the next generation of storytellers, reminding them that art thrives not on ego, but on empathy, not on power, but on persistence. She smiled, serene, untouchable, a woman who had transformed concealment into revelation. As she left the podium, the ovation swelled again, a tide carrying her into history not as an heiress, but as an architect of change. Ryan remained in the shadows, trapped between disbelief and despair. Around him, conversations resumed, deals were struck, laughter returned, but he no longer belonged in that current. The industry had shifted its gaze, and he was now a relic of failed ambition, a cautionary figure recorded in the background of someone else's triumph. For Amanda, the moment was not vengeance, it was liberation. The mask had served its purpose, the test had been completed, and the world now knew who she was on her own terms. Her revelation had less to do with exposing him, and more with affirming herself. Yet the irony remained sharp. The man who once demanded a partner polished for the red carpet now stood eclipsed by the woman he had underestimated. The night ended with her name etched into memory, not as a shadow of her family, but as a force reborn. For Ryan, it marked the quiet disintegration of a dream. For Amanda, it was the final act of freedom, a declaration not shouted but lived before the eyes of all who mattered.